I claimed I'd be gone for 1 week. What my DIL changed inside my late husband's room. Margaret woke before the sun, the way she often did now. The house was quiet in that deep, heavy way that comes before morning. She lay still for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car passing on the main road. Her hands rested on her stomach, thin and pale against the grey blanket. For a second, she reached toward the other side of the bed out of habit, then stopped. That space had been empty for 3 years. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake anyone. The guest room she slept in used to be her husband's study before illness took him from it. Now it held a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a window that faced the neighbor's fence. She slipped her feet into worn slippers and stood, her knees stiff, her body reminding her of its age. The house did not feel like hers, but she moved through it as if it were, because there was no other place to go. The hallway floor creaked softly as she walked toward the kitchen. She knew where each board would complain and stepped around them without thinking. That skill had come from years of moving through a shared life, learning how to live without waking someone you loved. In the kitchen, she filled the kettle and set it on the stove. While it heated, she wiped the counter that was already clean, then arranged the cups so their handles faced the same way. Small tasks helped her steady her mind. From the kitchen doorway, she could see the closed door at the end of the hall. Her late husband's room. No one used it. No one entered it. It stood there like a held breath. Inside were his books, his chair by the window, the jacket he had worn on cool evenings. Margaret had kept it exactly the same, as if time had stopped at the moment he left. She told herself it was respect. Some days, she knew it was fear. When the kettle began to whistle, she poured the water and carried her tea to the small table. She sat alone, hands wrapped around the warm cup, and watched light creep into the room. Living with her son and his wife had seemed like a blessing at first. After the funeral, after the empty house, after nights that felt too long, they had insisted. You should not be alone, they said. It will be easier, they said. She believed them because she wanted to. Her son was kind, in his way. He worked long hours and spoke gently when he remembered. Rachel, his wife, was polite, careful with her words, always smiling in a tight, tired way. At first, Margaret thought the tension she felt was only in her own head. Grief made people imagine things. But over time, small comments began to gather like dust in the corners of the room. The guest room is getting crowded, Rachel had said one afternoon, standing in the doorway with her arms folded. Maybe we could sort through some of these boxes. Or, that room at the end of the hall has so much stuff. We need the space, don't we? She never said his name. She never said the word death. She spoke as if the room were just a storage problem, not a place that held a life. Margaret nodded each time, offering soft answers, promising to look through things soon. She did not argue. She did not explain that opening that door felt like opening a wound that never healed. She kept her feelings folded neatly inside, the way she always had. She had been taught that peace came from staying quiet. That morning, as she drank her tea, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Rachel came into the kitchen, already dressed for work, phone in hand. She gave Margaret a quick smile. "Morning," she said. "Good morning," Margaret replied. Rachel opened the fridge, sighed softly, and shifted things around. "We really need to clean this out this weekend," she said, not looking up. "There's just not enough room anymore." Margaret nodded. "Of course." Rachel grabbed a yogurt and checked her phone again. "Also," she added, "my sister might come to stay for a few days next month. We'll need the extra room." Margaret felt something tighten in her chest. "Which room?" she asked, though she already knew. Rachel paused, then said lightly, "Well, the spare room at the end of the hall makes the most sense." Margaret did not answer. She stared into her cup and watched the steam rise and disappear. Later that day, after her son had left for work and the house grew quiet again, Margaret went to the end of the hall. She stood before the closed door, her hand hovering near the knob. She could almost hear her husband's voice on the other side, calm and teasing, asking what she was waiting for. She stepped back instead. Not today. She spent the afternoon folding laundry, even though there was little to fold. She arranged and rearranged items on the shelf in her room. Her mind would not settle. Something felt off, like a faint sound you could not place, a warning you did not yet understand. That evening, she went to bed early. The house settled around her, familiar and yet strange. She lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Just as sleep began to take her, she heard voices. They were low, coming from the living room. She recognized her son's voice and Rachel's, sharp and tired. She did not mean to listen, but the words drifted down the hall and caught her ear. "I can't keep living like this," Rachel said. "Everything feels frozen. That room, her things, it's like we're stuck." "She's my mother," her son replied. "She's been through a lot." "I know," Rachel said. "But what about us? We need space. We need our life back." This was supposed to be temporary. There was a pause. Margaret held her breath. "Maybe," Rachel continued, "it would be easier if she stayed with her sister more often. Or found somewhere else. I don't mean to be cruel, but we can't move forward like this." Margaret's heart pounded. She felt as though she had stepped into cold water. She backed away from the door and returned to her room, closing it softly behind her. Her hands shook as she sat on the bed. She did not cry. Not then. She felt numb, as if her feelings had gone quiet to protect her. She understood in that moment that she was a problem to be solved. A piece of furniture that no longer fit. The next morning, she made her decision. At breakfast, she mentioned casually that she might visit her sister for a week. Her sister lived 2 towns away and had asked her many times before. Rachel's face brightened before she could hide it. "That sounds nice," Rachel said. "You should go. Get a change of scene." Her son looked relieved and sad at the same time. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes," Margaret said, forcing a small smile. "It will do me good." All day, she acted as if nothing had changed. She packed a small bag, careful not to take too much. She wrote a note and left it on the kitchen counter, thanking them for everything. She kissed her son's cheek and accepted Rachel's polite hug. When the door closed behind her, Margaret stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in the cool air. She walked down the steps and waited for the car she had called earlier. As it drove away, she watched the house grow smaller in the distance. She did go to her sister's. They talked and drank tea and shared old stories. Margaret laughed when she was supposed to and slept in a bed that was not her own. But her unease did not leave her. Each night, she dreamed of that closed room and woke with her heart racing. On the 3rd day, she decided she could not stay the whole week. She told her sister she missed home, that she needed to check on a few things. Her sister did not argue. She had learned long ago that Margaret's mind, once made up, could not be changed. Margaret returned quietly, earlier than planned. As the taxi pulled up to the house, she felt a strange mix of fear and determination. Something inside her told her she needed to see for herself what happened when she was gone. She paid the driver and stood for a moment, listening. The house looked the same from the outside. But she sensed that something inside had shifted, and whatever she was about to find would change things forever. The house felt different the morning after Margaret left. It was quieter in a way that did not feel peaceful, but unfinished. Rachel noticed it the moment she came downstairs. There was no kettle on the stove. No cup left drying near the sink. No soft movement in the hallway. Just space. She told herself that was normal. Margaret was only gone for a week. People went away all the time. Still, as Rachel moved through the kitchen, she felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Relief because the house finally felt like it belonged to her and her husband again. Unease because the silence made her thoughts louder. Her husband sat at the table scrolling through his phone. "She texted me," he said. "She got there fine." "That's good," Rachel replied, opening the fridge. "I'm glad she went." He looked up at her. "You are?" Rachel shrugged. "I think it's healthy. For everyone. Some space." He nodded slowly but said nothing. He had always avoided conflict, choosing quiet agreement over long talks that went nowhere. Rachel had learned that about him early on. After breakfast, he left for work. The door closed behind him, and Rachel stood alone in the living room. She looked around, taking it all in. The house was neat, but it didn't feel complete. It felt crowded with things that were not hers. Furniture that had been moved to make room. Boxes stacked carefully but never opened. Memories that did not belong to her. She began with small things. A drawer in the hallway filled with old papers. A cabinet in the laundry room holding items no one used anymore. She told herself she was just cleaning. Just organizing. Things that needed to be done eventually. As the hours passed, her confidence grew. With every bag she filled, every surface she cleared, the house felt lighter. More like a place she could breathe in. She imagined how nice it would feel when Margaret returned to a cleaner, more open home. Surely she would understand. By afternoon, Rachel stood at the end of the hallway, staring at the closed door. The room. She had avoided it for years. Not out of respect, but discomfort. That door represented everything she did not know how to deal with. Grief that did not fade. A past that took up space in her present. She placed her hand on the door, then pulled it back. "Unused space," she muttered. "That's all it is." She opened the door. The air inside felt still, as if the room had been holding its breath. Dust floated in the sunlight coming through the window. Everything was exactly where it had been left. The bed made neatly. The jacket hanging behind the door. Books lined carefully on the shelf. A faint, familiar scent lingered. Rachel felt a flicker of something like guilt, but she pushed it aside. "No one even comes in here," she said aloud. "This isn't healthy." She started with the closet. Carefully at first. Folding clothes. Placing them into boxes. She told herself she was preserving them, not erasing them. She labeled each box neatly, writing in clear letters. As the afternoon wore on, careful became quicker. Quicker became bolder. The chair by the window was moved. The desk cleared. Drawers opened without hesitation. Each action made the next one easier. She paused once, holding an old photograph she found tucked in a book. Margaret and her husband stood together, smiling, unaware of the future waiting for them. Rachel stared at it for a long moment, then placed it in a box without looking again. "This room doesn't belong to the dead," she said softly. "It belongs to the living." That evening, when her husband came home, he stopped short in the hallway. "What happened?" he asked. "I started cleaning," Rachel said casually. "You know how we talked about needing space." He looked toward the open door. The room did not look like a room anymore. It looked like a project halfway done. "She didn't say you could go in there," he said. Rachel crossed her arms. "She didn't say I couldn't. And it's been years. We can't keep pretending everything stays the same forever." He hesitated. "Maybe we should have waited." "For what?" Rachel snapped. "For another year? Another 5. This house is ours too." He sighed and turned away. "Just don't throw anything out." "I won't," Rachel said quickly. And she meant it. At least, she thought she did. Over the next 2 days, the changes continued. Boxes filled the garage. Furniture was shifted into storage. Rachel made lists and plans. She imagined the room becoming a guest room, then maybe an office. A space with light and purpose. Each night, she felt justified. Proud, even. She told herself she was doing what Margaret could not. What no one else was brave enough to do. When doubt crept in, she silenced it. This was for the future. For her marriage. For a home that did not feel stuck in yesterday. By the 3rd day, The room barely resembled what it once was. Only faint outlines remained where furniture had stood. The walls felt bare, almost relieved. Rachel stood in the doorway, hands on her hips, and smiled. "Better," she whispered. She did not hear the car pull up outside. She did not know Margaret had come home early. She only felt, suddenly, as if someone were watching her. The house, once quiet, seemed to hold its breath again. Margaret arrived late, later than she had planned. The bus had been delayed, then the taxi took the long way around. By the time she stood at the edge of the driveway, the house was dark except for a single light glowing faintly through the front window. She held her small bag close to her side and listened. Everything felt still, but not in the comforting way she remembered. She did not knock. There was no need. This was supposed to be home. The key turned softly in the lock. As she pushed the door open, a smell greeted her that made her pause. It was clean, sharper than before, like something had been wiped too thoroughly. She stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind her. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light. The first thing she noticed was the wall near the stairs. A framed photograph used to hang there. It had been taken years ago, a simple family picture from a holiday afternoon. It was gone. In its place was a bare patch, slightly lighter than the rest of the wall. Margaret stood very still. She took off her shoes and set them neatly by the door, out of habit. Her heart began to beat faster, though she did not yet know why. She moved into the living room, her steps slow, cautious. The furniture was arranged differently. Not much, just enough to feel wrong. The side table had been moved. The lamp angled another way. On the shelf, spaces appeared where small items once stood. She touched the edge of the shelf with her fingers, tracing the dust-free lines where objects had been. Her bag slipped from her shoulder and landed softly on the floor. Margaret told herself there was an explanation. Cleaning. Tidying. Perhaps Rachel had meant well. She repeated those thoughts like a quiet prayer as she walked down the hallway. The hallway felt longer than before. She stopped halfway when she noticed the boxes. They were stacked neatly against the wall near the garage door. Labeled. Organized. Final. Her name was written on them in dark ink. She bent slightly and rested her hand on one of the boxes. It was sealed. Her breath caught. She straightened and continued toward the end of the hall. Each step felt heavier than the last. The door to her husband's room was open. That door was never open. Margaret stood there for a long moment, unable to move. The light inside was on, bright and unforgiving. She could see the room clearly from where she stood, and what she saw did not make sense. The bed was gone. The chair by the window was gone. The desk was gone. In their place stood unfamiliar furniture. A plain bed frame leaned against the wall, unassembled. A small table sat where the chair used to be, holding nothing. The walls looked bare, stripped of the warmth they once held. Margaret stepped inside. The floor felt cold beneath her feet. She turned slowly, taking it all in. The shelves were empty. The closet door stood open, revealing hangers without clothes. The jacket that once hung behind the door was gone. She reached for the wall, steadying herself. For a moment, she could not breathe. Then she saw the trash bag in the corner. It was half full, tied loosely at the top. She knelt down, ignoring the pain in her knees, and opened it with trembling hands. Inside were things she recognized immediately. A scarf. Old letters tied with ribbon. A cracked picture frame. Margaret pressed the bag to her chest and let out a sound she did not recognize as her own. She sat there on the floor for a long time. Time passed without shape. Her mind replayed memories she had kept safe, now scattered and handled by someone else's hands. She thought of her husband sitting in that chair, reading quietly. Of his laughter filling the room. Of the nights she had sat beside him when sleep would not come. All of it had been touched, moved, judged. The grief that followed was sharp and sudden, like a wave crashing without warning. But beneath it ran something deeper. Betrayal. This had not been cleaning. This had been a decision. Margaret stood slowly and left the room, closing the door behind her with care. She walked back down the hallway and into her own small room. Even there, things were different. Drawers felt lighter. The closet more empty. She sat on the edge of the bed and folded her hands in her lap. They shook. She did not cry loudly. The house was too quiet for that. Instead, tears slipped down her face in silence, one after another, as if they had been waiting their turn. She stayed like that until the sound of a car outside broke the stillness. Footsteps. Keys. Voices. Margaret wiped her face quickly and stood. She stepped into the hallway just as her son entered, surprise flashing across his face. "Mom," he said. "You're back already." Rachel appeared behind him. Her smile froze the moment she saw Margaret. "Oh," Rachel said. "I didn't know you were coming tonight." "I know," Margaret replied. Her voice was calm, but it did not sound like her own. They stood there, the three of them, surrounded by what could no longer be ignored. Rachel glanced toward the end of the hall, then back at Margaret. "We were just organizing," Rachel began. "I meant to tell you." Margaret raised her hand gently. "I saw the room," she said. The words hung heavy in the air. Her son swallowed. "Mom, we didn't mean to upset you." Margaret looked at him, really looked at him, and felt another kind of hurt settle in. The kind that comes when silence is mistaken for permission. "I didn't leave forever," she said quietly. "I left for a week." No one answered. Margaret turned and walked back into her room. She closed the door and sat down, pressing her hands over her mouth as the weight of it all finally came crashing down. The house, once filled with memories, now felt like a place she did not recognize. And for the first time since her husband's death, Margaret understood something with painful clarity. She was no longer safe here. Morning came slowly, as if the house itself was unsure whether it wanted to wake up. Margaret had not slept much. She lay still through the night, listening to every sound, replaying what she had seen, what she had felt. By the time light slipped through the curtains, she was already dressed, sitting at the edge of the bed with her hands folded neatly in her lap. She did not feel angry yet. She felt tired. A deep, bone-heavy tiredness that came from carrying too much for too long. In the kitchen, she poured herself a cup of tea. Her hands were steady. She took a sip and waited. Rachel came downstairs first. Her steps were quick, her movements sharp. She stopped short when she saw Margaret at the table. "Good morning," Margaret said quietly. Rachel hesitated, then forced a smile. "Morning." Margaret gestured toward the chair across from her. "Sit with me for a moment." Rachel stayed standing. "I'm actually running late." "It won't take long," Margaret said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. Something in her tone made Rachel sit. Margaret wrapped her hands around the cup. "I'd like to ask you a few questions," she said. "And I'd like honest answers." Rachel crossed her arms. "Okay. Who decided to go into my husband's room?" Margaret asked. Rachel's jaw tightened. "I did." "Why?" Rachel let out a short breath. "Because it was needed. That room was just sitting there. Unused." Margaret nodded slowly. "Did you think to ask me?" Rachel's voice rose slightly. "I didn't think I needed permission to clean a room in my own house." Margaret looked at her then, really looked at her. "It is your house," she said. "But it was his room. And it was my grief." Rachel shifted in her chair. "It wasn't healthy, Margaret. Keeping everything frozen like that. It was holding everyone back." Margaret's fingers tightened around the cup. "Who is everyone?" Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it. "Us," she said finally. "This family." Just then, Margaret's son entered the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He stopped when he felt the tension in the room. "What's going on?" he asked. Margaret turned to him. I'm asking questions, she said. And I'd like you to stay. He sat beside Rachel, glancing between them. Margaret continued. Where are my husband's things? Rachel answered quickly. They're boxed. In the garage. Nothing was thrown away. Except what was in the trash bag, Margaret said softly. Rachel flushed. That was old stuff. Broken frames. Papers. They were letters, Margaret said. Written to me. Silence filled the kitchen. Her son swallowed. Rachel, he said quietly. You didn't tell me about that. Rachel turned to him. I was trying to help. Someone had to do something. Margaret leaned forward slightly. Help whom? Rachel's voice cracked. I was tired of living in a house that felt like a memorial. I was tired of tiptoeing around a room no one was allowed to touch. I was tired of feeling like I came second to a man who isn't even here anymore. The words spilled out before she could stop them. Margaret did not interrupt. She listened. Her son stared at the table. That's not fair, he said weakly. Rachel turned to him. Isn't it? You never wanted to talk about it. You just let it sit there. Like everything else. Margaret straightened. That room was not a threat, she said. It was a memory. And memories do not disappear just because they make someone uncomfortable. Rachel shook her head. You don't understand what it's like. Margaret's voice sharpened, just slightly. I understand loss. That stopped Rachel. Margaret continued. I lost my husband. I lost my home. I lost my sense of place in this family. And I stayed quiet because I thought kindness meant silence. Her son looked up, pain clear on his face. Mom, I didn't know you felt like that. Margaret met his eyes. I tried to tell you. In small ways. You didn't hear me. Rachel stood abruptly. So what, now I'm the villain? No, Margaret said. You are someone who chose control over compassion. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was hard. I chose a future. Margaret shook her head. You chose to erase what made you uncomfortable. Her son stood too, caught between them. Please, he said. Can we calm down? Margaret rose slowly. I am calm, she said. That is what frightens me. She picked up her cup and set it gently in the sink. I did not ask for much. Just respect. Just time. Rachel crossed her arms again. So what do you want now? Margaret paused. She felt the weight of the moment settle around her. For years, she had avoided moments like this. She had chosen peace over truth. Now, she said, I want my husband's things returned to where they belong. And I want it understood that my grief is not an inconvenience. Rachel laughed bitterly. You can't put everything back the way it was. I know, Margaret replied. But you will not decide what stays and what goes. Her son nodded slowly. She's right, he said, surprising them both. Rachel turned to him. You're taking her side? I'm taking responsibility, he said. I should have stopped this. Rachel looked away, her face tight. I was trying to move us forward. Margaret spoke one last time. Moving forward does not mean pretending the past never existed. The room fell silent again. The truth hung between them, clear and heavy. This had never been about space. It had never been about cleaning. It was about discomfort. About whose feelings were allowed to take up room. Margaret turned and walked back toward her room. She closed the door behind her, not gently this time. In the kitchen, her son and Rachel stood apart, both realizing that something had changed. Something that could not be undone. The house did not feel quiet anymore. It felt awake. The days that followed were quiet, but not the kind of quiet Margaret once knew. This silence carried weight. It pressed into every room, settled between words, lingered after footsteps faded. No one rushed to fill it. Margaret spent the first morning sorting through boxes in the garage. Her son offered to help, but she asked him to leave her alone. Not angrily. Simply, firmly. He nodded and stepped back, as if realizing for the first time that she meant what she said. She opened each box slowly. Some things were there. Clothes folded carefully. Books stacked with care. Small objects wrapped in paper. She touched each item as if greeting an old friend. Relief came in small waves, followed by quiet sadness. Other things were missing. The letters she had written back to her husband during his hospital stays were gone. The watch he wore every day. A notebook filled with his handwriting. She searched every box, then searched again, even though she knew. When Rachel finally admitted they had been thrown out during cleaning, Margaret felt something inside her loosen and fall away. Not anger. Not shock. Acceptance. Some things do not come back. That afternoon, Margaret went into the room at the end of the hall one last time. The room no longer felt like his. It no longer felt like hers. It felt like a place that had been disturbed too deeply to be healed. She opened the window and let fresh air move through it. Then she took the photograph she had recovered and placed it on the sill. Not to restore the room. Just to say goodbye. Later that evening, she asked her son to sit with her. "I'm going to leave," she said. He looked startled. "Mom, you don't have to. We can fix this." Margaret shook her head gently. Some things don't get fixed. They get understood. Rachel stood in the doorway, silent. "I found a small apartment," Margaret continued. "Close to my sister. It's already arranged." Her son's eyes filled. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I needed to decide without being talked out of it," Margaret replied. "This choice is not punishment. It's protection." Rachel spoke quietly. "I didn't mean for it to end like this." Margaret met her gaze. Intent does not erase impact. There was nothing more to say. Margaret moved out 2 weeks later. She took only what she needed. The rest she left behind without resentment. On her last morning in the house, she stood in the doorway and looked back. Not with longing. With clarity. In her new apartment, she unpacked slowly. She placed her husband's photograph on a small table near the window. She lit a candle beside it in the evenings and spoke to him in the quiet, the way she always had. No one told her it was time to move on. No one touched what was sacred. Her son visited often. Their conversations were careful at first, then honest. Rachel did not come. Distance settled naturally between them, shaped by choices that could not be undone. Margaret did not feel bitter. She felt steady. Grief remained, but it no longer felt like something she had to defend. It belonged to her again. And in that quiet space she built for herself, Margaret understood the lesson she wished others had learned sooner. Respect is not loud, but its absence is. And once certain lines are crossed, even silence remembers.